Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
Hi, I'm Patricia Lewin, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Authors Love Readers podcast. Our guest this time is Patricia Lewin. I had to hesitate because she's also known as Patricia Keelyn. And Patricia, who I will probably slip and call Pat at some point, maybe throughout, is one of my best writing buddies, one of my longest term writing buddies, too. We met, shall I say, the real year?
Well, I don't know which is worse, saying the real year or how long ago it was.
We were both toddlers. It was my very first Romance Writers of America conference in Boston, and I had sold my first book, but it hadn't come out yet. It was 1989. And it was standing in line to register for the hotel. She claims she doesn't remember. She forgot me, but I remember. So we have known each other all this time, ups and downs, a few tragedies here and there, lots of good news, lots of fun times, and changing our writing too. We both have ventured in different ways. So this is going to be an interesting conversation because, as I said, she has two names. That's because she's writing two things. Patricia Lewin is doing thrillers, and Patricia Keelyn has the romance, and where Patricia, Pat, started her writing. So, to get us started, get us loosey-goosey here, we're going to do some quick, quirky questions. What are some surprising jobs you've held, Pat?
Well, surprising. I worked in a chemistry lab as a chemical lab technician. That was a little different.
Did you blow anything up?
No, it was for a frozen potato company. It was a long time ago, and we did testing to make sure that there were no chemicals in the frozen products. It was a lot of fun, actually.
You didn't blow up any frozen potatoes? Oh, what an opportunity!
Wouldn't that have been a mess? Yeah, but I only did that for a short time. But my main job before writing was that I worked for IBM as a programmer, computer programmer. I don't know if that's surprising or not.
Well, it is. I think it is a little bit surprising because a lot of authors come from teaching, few number of us from journalism. There are a fair number of escaped lawyers, but not so much from the computer world. So that's interesting. Okay, do you have a childhood book that addicted you to stories?
Yes. The Black Stallion series by Walter Farley.
Oh, I love those.
I could not get enough of them. I started with those. I have three older sisters, and one of them, I'm sure I was annoying her. She took me to the library to get rid of me and took me to this section of the book, the kids store, and that's where I found the Black Stallion, and she never had to worry about getting rid of me after that because books worked.
That's a great series, and a lot of people don't know it as a whole series, that it wasn't just the first book.
Oh yeah, and for a while after reading that as a kid, and I've actually gone through this with kids I know now, nothing was ever as good for quite a while after that.
You know, there's a whole series of books like Misty of Chincoteague, and
I read those too.
By Marguerite Henry, yes. And she was from the little town in Illinois that was next to my little town in
Really?
Illinois. Yeah.
That series was part of my search to find something as good as Black Stallion, and what was the other one? The Black Racehorse. What was it? Black Beauty. Black Beauty wasn't as good either. Be interesting to read them as adults and see what I think of them now.
I don't know if I want to read them as an adult because I want to hold on to that feeling, and especially as an adult writer, because it can make it harder to read books purely as readers.
That's
so
true.
I may not look at them again. But okay, did you ever have a story from your pre-author days that you rewrote the ending, at least in your head, because it didn't end right?
The Black Stallion. Are you detecting a theme here?
Yeah.
I really do not remember, because it was a long time ago, how I rewrote the end, but the ending bugged me, and I didn't want it to end that way, so that's why I rewrote the ending myself.
And do you think that led you toward being a writer?
Possibly. I mean, I started becoming a little obsessed with it at that point. I don't think as a kid it ever occurred to me that I could actually write as a profession, but that was the first experience I had with writing, and then I moved into other stuff when I was in high school that was different too.
You know, Pat, most authors, at least this is my theories, have a bad habit word, something they use all the time and have to take out. So what's yours?
You want mine now or my original one? When I first started writing.
Oh, I want both.
Okay,
now.
when I first started, my first books I wrote, I was the queen of should'ves and would'ves and could'ves. Yes. And I had a critique partner who at that point was very vocally pointed out to me that that was incorrect. There was no should've, would'ves, and could'ves. But then later on I moved into, I'm very good with the words still and yet. She did something. Still or yet. So now to this day I still have to go and do finds on those words and pull them out because I tend to go crazy with them.
Oh, that's really interesting. One of mine is really.
Really?
I have to, I do search and
Really?
replace or search and delete. It's, and very and just.
Yes.
So when I'm trying to intensify, it's the really and the very. And when I'm trying to diminish, it's the just. And, there I go. You have to use the strong enough or the right word for the situation and not rely on those crutches.
That's true.
But I like my crutches.
But still.
Yes, but still, and yet.
And yet, yes.
Okay, what 3 movies would you take with you to a desert island that somehow let you play movies?
Oh my gosh. Pat and I are going to disagree on these so much.
Yeah, we're going to be on different islands.
I know. Different islands. Avatar. Can I say the whole Lord of the Rings series?
Oh, that's sneaky.
Yes. And this is one Pat really is not going to like. Aliens. The second one, not the first one. Aliens.
Yeah, we're on different We're on different islands.
But we've known that for a long time.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more. You're right-handed.
Yes.
On your right hand, is your ring finger or your index finger longer?
My index finger. Well, no, depends on how I twist the thing. My ring finger.
Okay. I'm just curious. That it has no significance that I know of. I'm just curious. All right. Now we're going to talk about some more about writing and your works and your books. What's the easiest book you've written that it was just a joy to write?
Probably Blind Run.
Okay, and that's the first of your thrillers.
It's first of my thrillers. It's a standalone, although I have gotten so much feedback about having a sequel, and I did set it up for a sequel. But
including feedback from, somebody else who might be on this podcast, maybe?
Possibly. Have you told me that I need a sequel? A lot of I mean,
yes, I've told you that.
I actually set it up for a sequel, and I plan to write it, the sequel, right after writing Blind Run. I had it all plotted at that point. And my publisher at that time didn't want the sequel. They wanted something completely different. But as far as the writing goes, Blind Run came fairly easily to me. It was just something I wanted to write thrillers so bad that it just kind of came.
And at that point, how many romances had you published?
9.
Do you think do you feel like you were always meant to write thrillers?
Yes, I do. I think that is I enjoy writing romance, and I enjoy reading romance more than I enjoy writing romance. But the suspense comes easier to me. The actual writing of action and with some emotional components, obviously, but the actual tension and everything, suspense, comes much easier to me than the tension in a romance.
What do you think people who ask you about writing romance and writing thrillers, what do they get wrong about the different approaches to the two different genres?
The different approaches to both romances and thrillers?
Yeah, I'm thinking that there's probably expectations from readers about how a romance author might attack a thriller, and then go back to a romance. How you would shift gears, and I'm wondering if those expectations are right, or if you think it's what your experience has been.
To me, they are two separate ways of thinking when I'm writing. And I'm not sure I'm answering your question the way you want. One is the focus in a romance. The focus is on the relationship and on the love story. And you can trickle in some suspense, which I tended to do in my later romances, was there's always the more romantic suspense, light, L-I-T-E, than heavy romantic suspense. Whereas the suspense or a thriller is almost the exact opposite. All the focus is on, the bad stuff. And the more, if you can put an emotional component with that makes the suspense of the thriller stronger. There are very successful thriller writers who write just straight action. And that's not me. I need to add that component, that emotional component. And I actually think that writing romance first helped me write better suspenses, because I can't completely get away from the emotional component of the characters.
So it makes you go deeper into your characters in the thrillers.
Right. You had asked me earlier somewhere about my favorite quotes, and it just made me think of one. Michael Haig says that all story is about emotion, whether it is the sweetest romance or the most hardcore thriller or science fiction story. And I think he's right. If your characters don't feel, whether it's just fear or whether it's love, they have to feel something. And I think writing romance helped me to put elements of emotion into my suspense, whether they are fear or whether they are love. Does that make any sense?
Yes, you said that it was a different way of thinking. Do you find that your mood or how you're feeling about things is affected by what you're writing?
You mean affects the genre that I want to write in, or just affects the writing in general?
No, affects it. Say you're writing a thriller. Are you then in a different kind of mind frame because you're writing a thriller from what you might be when you're writing a romance? In other words, which one should I wait for you to be writing before I call up and ask a favor?
No, I don't think that my mood affects which of the genres that I want to write in. My mood affects whether I can write.
I was asking the opposite, whether the genre affects your mood.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Sorry.
You even keel people, you. So when you published your first book, when your first book got published, and Pat started in traditional publishing, as did I, how did that change your writing process at all?
It did, quite a bit. I was working at IBM when I wrote my first book. Actually, I wrote 3 books before I sold one. And I was working at IBM, so I was writing on weekends and on lunch hours, and instead of going on vacations, I would write. So it was constant. And a month before my very first book came out, I left IBM. It was a variety of circumstances. It was not because I thought that I was suddenly going to be able to support myself writing one book, but and so then suddenly I had to write full time, and it was a transition to suddenly go from writing at every available moment to having time. And at first, it worked because I had a very insightful young editor who threw a contract out at me and said, "We have a slot open, but you have got to write this book in 8 weeks." And I don't think I could do that now, but I did it then. So it got me into the process of setting up my time, so many hours a day, although I do page counts, how many page counts a day. So that's what happened.
And you still do that? How many page counts?
I'm not as good at it as I used to be. There's a lot more distractions now. It's easier. What I found over time, it's easier to get distracted, and it's easier not to have a steady rhythm when you have all day.
That's true.
And there are people that are extremely good at that. I am good at it in spots. Sometimes I, can go every day and write whatever my page count is, and sometimes I can't.
What's your favorite part of the writing process?
Oh, I love story building. Story building, creating worlds and connections and people and scenarios. I love story building.
So is that necessarily before you start writing, or is that while you're writing as well?
Both. I start off beforehand. I have this whole thing going on in my head, and then the story building goes on as I write. And on the flip side, the hardest thing for me is the actual putting words on paper. Well, not on paper, on the screen, because I'm a bit of a wordsmith, and so I sit there and fuss, over sentences or paragraphs instead of just getting the story out. Well, the story's all in my head, but it's a little harder for me to actually, get the words in the screen.
And then how does that affect your editing? So if you're fussing word by word in the draft process, are you pretty well set when you go to edit?
Yes. I'm pretty close to a first draft writer, meaning by the time I get done with the book, it is pretty close to being finished. I do go through it, of course, again, and when I was writing for traditional publishers, they went through it several times, and I always had to do some revisions, but the book is, the actual writing and everything is pretty clean when I get it done, the first draft. Now, there may be structural issues sometimes or plotting problems, more of those than there are actual craft issues.
Have you ever edited something out of a book or had something edited out that you still mourn?
A character name.
Oh.
Character name. In my book, Once a Wife, which I think was my third, not my second, I think it was my third book.
And it's back out now?
It is back out now. And actually, since I thought about this question, I thought, oh, maybe I can go back and change this now. My character, and my editor has since told me years later that this was, in her opinion, the best of my books, of my romances. The character is half Shoshone Indian, and she was raised on a reservation, and I picked her name as a Shoshone name. It was Kaya, Kaya. And when I submitted it, the senior editor, not my editor, but her boss, told me that I couldn't use that name because it sounded too romancy. This is a romance, right?
Yeah.
So for all the editing process, I had to change her name, change it to Sarah, which is a little standard romance character name. But I could not stop thinking of her as Kaya because that's what she was to me through the whole process of writing the book. But I thought, go ahead.
I was just going to say I have a similar story.
Okay.
And I did change the character's name back when I brought the book out myself. It's A New World, my second book. The heroine's first name is Eleanor, and she becomes involved with a man who is a modern-day Irish immigrant to the United States. And I very carefully found her name. I wanted it to sound a certain way. I wanted some hard sounds, and I wanted it to be connected to Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is where the book is set. And I also spent, this was back pre-internet days, I spent an hour plus on the phone with this wonderful woman from the Chamber of Commerce on Cape Ann, which is where Gloucester is, looking up to make sure that there was no family that actually had that name because I said nasty things about the family, and I didn't want there to be a real family that I accidentally insulted. So in my world, her name was always Thatcher. Eleanor Thatcher. Mm-hmm. There's a Thatcher Island by Gloucester, and there was then no Thatcher family. And the editors came back, I think it was a senior editor again, and said, you cannot call her that because our UK readers would be upset with a woman named Thatcher sleeping with an Irishman.
That is so ridiculous. That's as weird as mine.
Yep.
Traditional publishers, sometimes they had very strange ideas.
In the traditional published edition, she was, what was she? Halston, I think, which I never liked. So I blithely changed her back.
Even the last name change. That is even stranger than a first name change.
Yeah.
Well,
so we've both had that episode. And now, how do you go about naming characters?
It's kind of a varied process. I kind of troll around. I look through baby books, and I really am stuck on a story until I get that name, but I'll use X's for a while. But the name has got to have the right feel for me, and I will go look up meanings of names. Like my last romance that I just put out in April, the character's name is Daniel, and it just fit. He is a beast, and he has communes with animals, and it just seemed to fit with the whole biblical thing.
Yes.
Daniel and the lion, or
that feel, yeah.
Yes. So it names. I go a little crazy with names, trying to find the right one. And that's why Sarah in Once a Wife really bothered me, because although Sarah is a beautiful name, it did not fit this character. And it just, you know what I would love to hear from your readers if they respond? If I would change the name now, the book's been out again digitally for, I don't know, a year and a half more. It is probably one of my best-selling books. What if I change her name now? Is it too late? Would that drive everybody crazy?
Why would it? Because the people who have already read it have read it. It would be for the new readers coming to it.
Yeah, I might do that.
I say change it.
Okay, I'll do it.
You know me. I'm a rebel. Touching off how you look for names, this sort of connects. This also goes back to the world building. What sort of research do you do, and when do you do it, and do you enjoy it, or is it a chore?
I do my research differently for the romances and for the suspense. When I started writing my Lewin books, my thrillers, I did an immense amount of research about the CIA, because my books are not really about the CIA, but my main characters are CIA officers or ex-CIA officers who kind of go off the rails, so to speak. So I did a lot of research on the CIA. I read everything I could find of them. And then I also had a connection with a woman who was one of those serendipitous things where I met her. I was looking for something. Originally I was going to make the character NSA, and it just wasn't working. And I met this woman, and she was an ex-CIA analyst who was a budding writer. And she couldn't write anything like I was writing because of her non-disclosure agreement with the CIA. But she could help me to a certain extent. So I did an immense amount of research on that, on the CIA, because it was so pivotal. It was so integral to the story. Now, other types of research, like for my romances, or actually for some of the peripheral stuff in the suspenses, I kind of write through it and then go back and look and see if I'm right. Especially the romances, I did this a lot. If I wasn't sure about something, I'd write something through it. I'd write through it and I'd highlight it and then I'd go back. And I found that 90% of the time that I was right, that I had guessed right, like locations or things like that. The suspense, I can't do that because obviously I didn't know anything about the CIA before I started. And then locations, I try and visit locations, or I write about places I've lived. And then I love going to research locations. Anyway, I do have a funny story about a location research thing that Blind Run is set in the San Juan Islands, which is off the northern coast of Washington State. And I had lived in Oregon, in Portland for years, so I had a really good feel for the Northwest and what it was. And there's some pieces, it's an island, and it's some pieces that were about Northwest weather and how, it's very cloudy and rainy there and cool. And so that was kind of a lot of that in Blind Run. And I recently got a review back from somebody who was telling me that I obviously had never been there because the San Juan Islands was one of the few places in the Northwest where there was not rain. Okay, So I was freaked out. Well, recently this summer, I went and spent some time on Orcas Island, which is on one of the northern big islands in the San Juans. And come to find out, there is a portion of the San Juan Islands in the Olympic rain shadow which doesn't have a lot of rain, but the rest of them are all rainy and cloudy, just like I said. And I asked 2 or 3 tour guides about this, and they all just kind of looked at me and they said, That's reasonable. Why would anybody think there isn't rain here? It rains all winter long. So that was kind of an interesting thing. Anyway.
To be proven right, that's always wonderful.
Well, it freaked me out because I thought, okay, did I get this whole book wrong?
Yes.
And it's just one reviewer, and he obviously had been to the part of the Olympic rain shadow where there wasn't raining. My book is set in a fake island on the very north side of the San Juans, almost up into Canada.
In the rainy part.
In the rainy part.
Okay, here's a question from a reader who says, where do your stories come from? And the reader went on to say, I know one author who dreams her stories, and Pat and I have a mutual friend who dreamed a story, very special one. Another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born?
I think that a character or a situation just kind of starts intruding on my thoughts. Or a situation. Blind Run came to me because I had this idea about a man having to protect children. I had a vision of the desert, and I had a vision of him having to protect kids and him being, wishing he'd rather be dead than alive, but he doesn't have the nerve to pull the trigger, and then these children redeem him. So that's where it started with that one. Sometimes I can't even tell you where it starts, but it usually is a situation that pops into my head, and then I have to find characters that fit it, or sometimes it's character. But I'm much more situational, where I start with a situation, and then I have to find characters that can play out that situation.
Yeah, I'm much more characters. They start talking in my head.
I know, I'm the weird one.
You are. I'm totally normal. I hear voices. What's your problem? So from that situation that comes in your head, do your stories often change a lot from that point to where you publish it?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I start playing around with it. I start, working out the details and trying to find how the situation can work, and that it often changes before the end. I remember one of my romantic suspenses, I don't even remember which one, when I was writing as Keelyn, I had a reviewer come back to me and said, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful, I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I thought to myself, that's because I didn't know what was going to happen next. I mean, I learned before I wrote the Lewin books that I had to plot these things out, but those first romantic suspenses that I wrote as romances, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know where the story was going to go, so I would write myself into a hole and then have to figure out how to get those characters out of the hole I'd put them in. I was lucky that it worked. I don't think it would have worked that easily with the thrillers.
So how do you plot ahead of time? Do you outline? Do you write a synopsis? Are you just doing notes? How do you plot those thrillers ahead?
I do a free flow outline with an idea. I mean, I knowing that the outline can be changed, nothing's cast in concrete, but I just write bullet points and then sub bullets, and every now and then I'll a piece of it will grab me, and I'll write maybe a section of dialogue. And then as I start writing, if something is bugging me, if I'm not finding a solution, or the way I had originally done it is not working, I will then take a little side thing and do another outline, like, why is this? What about this scene? What am I trying to accomplish in this scene? And will it move the story forward? The other thing that I find with thrillers, that I was working as an editor for a while, and I would do this with some of my my romantic suspense authors, is I have to define what the bad thing is. What is the bad stuff that my character is going up against? And then, and that is really integral, because until you know what your characters are fighting against, you don't have a story. So I will also do that on the side. So it's kind of a free flow type of outline type thing.
And do you do a lot of work with your bad guy characters or bad women characters?
I do. I find a lot of times that your antagonist could be a really interesting character, and sometimes you have to be careful that they don't take over the story. And I've come to them in different ways. For instance, in the second of the Erin Baker series, the Out of Time, which takes place in Cuba, which was so much fun. But anyway, I had a character. She wasn't the main antagonist, but she facilitated the main antagonist, and she was a brilliant researcher. Well, I had it as a man, because who knows why? Because that is the tried and true. One of the people that was helping with the researcher was a friend of mine who has a MD, PhD in molecular genetics, and she says, "Why does it have to be a man? Can't it be a woman?" And I don't know why I never thought of that. I was using her as research. That was kind of cool. So then once I had her as a woman instead of a man, then I could really flesh her out, and she became a much more interesting character than if it had just been a man. Plus, then I named the character after my friend, so she really loved that.
Did she get destroyed at the end of the book, or could that character show up again sometime?
She disappeared.
Aha! Which of your stories has surprised you the most?
I think Out of Reach, because I fell in love with my main character.
Okay, well, now wait, let's explain Out of Reach. So you did Blind Run was your first thriller.
Right, and it was a standalone at this point.
And Out of Reach was your second thriller.
Yes, and it was the first.
They're not related, but then Out of Reach is the first of a series.
Yes. Out of Reach is the first in what will be a 3-book series at this point. I'm working on the third, but Out of Reach was the first one, and it is about a CIA officer, Erin Baker, and I just fell in love with her. I always say that not only do I like her, I want to be her. She's tough, and she's brilliant, and she's got lots of baggage. So I fell in love with her as a character, and I tend to more fall in love with my male characters, but this one I really like Erin, and that's why there had to be a second, and now working, which is Out of Time. This is the one that takes place in Cuba, and now I'm working on the third one, which I'm hoping to get out early next year.
You're going to get it out early next year.
It'll be done by early next year. We'll have to go through the whole editing process and everything, and we'll see.
That sort of segues into, I was going to ask if you miss characters, as you did with Erin in Out of Reach, where you kind of missed her when the book was done and you wanted to do another book with her. Do you miss characters when you're done with them? A reader asked this, and it was because she misses the characters when she's finished a book that she really likes.
Well, I was obviously obsessed with Erin Baker. For my other books, earlier books, for my romances, I was more obsessed with the characters while I was writing them. Calling family members by my characters' names, etc. But Erin just kind of stuck in my head. Her story was not done in my head, and she's still the character I think about. Well, of course, because I'm writing the book, that part of it. But I will also admit that the blind run characters have stuck with me, and this goes back to the fact that the thrillers grab me. Some of the characters in Blind Run have stuck with me too, but mainly Erin. I think of all my characters is the one that I just had to write more about her. I had to know what was going to happen to her.
When you finish a book, do you celebrate, or do you celebrate beginning a book or publishing, or do you have particular celebrations?
I don't have particular or things that I do other than just collapsing or doing nothing, or going to movies or having a glass of wine or two, but I don't have any particular ritual that I do. It's just kind of like something has come out of you when you're done. It's like, oh my gosh, it's over. Okay, let's go on.
Re-entry to normal life.
Re-entry to everything gets put off at the very end there. The house gets to be a disaster. I haven't talked to my husband or kid and my daughter in a while, that kind of things. And so all that stuff can resurface after you get done with the book.
Do you remember the movie Romancing the Stone?
I do.
The beginning sequence where
Yes.
she's finishing a book and she goes around, she can't find anything to blow her nose on
Yes.
because she's run out of all these things.
Yes, that's very much the way it is. Yes.
Reality based. People think that's funny. It's not so funny when it's you.
When my husband would follow me around the house sometimes, and I would do things like, put the milk in the stove or the microwave away, or put things away in the wrong places, obvious wrong places, like cold stuff because your mind is elsewhere. Your mind is not on the everyday stuff.
I had a neighbor in Virginia who rang my doorbell one day at like 10:30 in the morning, which is very early for me.
Yes.
And I came down, was quite grumpy, and she said, I know you're on deadline, but I was worried because you left your car doors open all night.
Yes, I can see you doing that.
Which is very unlike me in ordinary times. And it's okay. You're forgiven. I think she had this vision of a massacre in my house. Of course, that started me on other story ideas. What do you read for fun?
I read all over the place, but I read a lot. Something that I have not let myself write, and so I enjoy it immensely, is science fiction and fantasy. Because I don't, you like stuff or you don't like it, but I don't tend to tear it apart like I do suspenses. If I write somebody else's suspense, I'm trying to figure out how they put it together when it works. Why is it so good, or why is it not so good? I don't do that with science fiction and fantasy. If I don't like it, I just stop reading it. It's tempting to actually write it because I do love it.
In addition to writers looking at things as writers, and I refer to it as seeing the man behind the curtain, do you also think that writers look at the world or at other people differently than most people?
It's possible. I mean, we're always seeing story ideas in every little thing. I remember years ago in my critique group, and this is gonna sound maybe heartless, when John Benet Ramsey was murdered, and we were sitting around in our critique group. The comment was, if I was writing this book, this is who would have done it. Yes, we look at story ideas and say, things that are happening in the news, and saying, okay, this is how I would do it.
There are a lot of studies now that story is part of the human condition, and that the brain processes story mostly the way it does real events. And I wonder if kind of the flip of that is true, that story is our way of processing horrific things.
It's true.
Or other things that are happening that we're observing, and possibly experiencing, and to look at it as a writer, you're involved in it emotionally, and yet you're also observing, which I think in some ways is protective.
Very much
Does
so.
that
Or you
make
could,
sense?
yeah, because something is bothering me a lot. I have on occasion written a short story where I change things. Or if you're upset about something, you can, and I've done this with a couple of things. And if I write a little short story about making things different or changing things, it makes me feel better, even if it's just a story. Does that make any sense?
Yes, absolutely. We have control.
Well, I think that's what it is. I think most writers, we do have a bit of a control issues. When we write, we control the universe.
Isn't that lovely? And we do
Yes.
such a good job of
We
with it,
do,
too.
and good always triumphs. The world is set right
In our books, yes.
in our books. Yes.
Okay, here is another question from a reader. It says, what is your favorite place to write and why? Does it have an inspirational view?
I have to write at my desk in my office on a desktop. And no inspirational view. In fact, I have the blinds closed. I do use music, though. I listen to classical music while I'm writing, and usually Chopin piano concertos. And my thought is, and you're going to laugh, is genius will inspire genius. But no, I know a lot of writers use their laptops and things and go and write in different circumstances, and I haven't quite got the comfort level of writing. I always feel like I'm playing when I'm writing on my laptop. So I'm at my desk in an office setting, and it's right here in front of me. I know that's not very exciting, right?
No, so you're trying to possibly block out some of the other visual stimulation so that you're not distracted from the vision that's in your head.
Exactly, and also because it's a writing cue or a trigger. When I'm at my desk,
Yes.
That's what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's why I listen to classical music. I can't listen to any music with words in it because I will start singing, and then we know we won't get any writing done.
I will start typing the words.
Oh, well, no, I've never tried that, but so you're right, and it's like the music is white noise. It's beautiful white noise, but it's white noise, and it does block things out.
Well, and especially I think if you play the same music over and over, it's an element of Pavlovs dogs. I hear this music, I write, and it also there's a certain rhythm to the music, and I think that can carry you through and keep you writing where you might otherwise have gone with a distraction.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, it does, and I do listen to the same music. I know some authors write different music to different books, and I've tried that. It doesn't really work for me. I always keep going back to the Chopin piano concertos. I mean, there's lots of other classical music without words out there, but why do I keep going back to the Chopin? I don't know. And I think what you just said is probably it. It's a trigger. It's what I'm used to, and it just soothes me and gets me concentrating on the words I'm trying to put down.
That's a great thing to have found for you.
Yeah, I don't know where. I've been doing it for a long time. I don't know where it came from.
Okay, ready for another reader question?
Yes.
This is applicable more to the traditional world, but let's see if it has any in your indie publishing too. It says, when the cover image doesn't match the character description, a pet peeve of mine, says the reader, how does it feel?
Drives me crazy. I have been blessed.
I knew that answer.
Yes, I've been blessed. I've had some really great covers, and no really horrible covers. But my original Blind Run cover, the original Suspense, although it was a beautiful cover, it drove me crazy because it's two characters, and it looked like a older kid, and a younger boy racing out on a pier into a really glassy ocean. Okay, well, it drove me crazy because the boy in the story is the older and the girl was younger, and there's a third person in there, an adult running with them, and they're running off to a pier in a turbulent Pacific. I know, these are really minor things, right? So it drove me crazy because the cover just, I said, you got this all wrong. And they basically told me to be quiet and go away. So that was one of the first things I changed when I went indie with this book, was that I got the cover the way I wanted it. So yes, they drives me crazy when the cover's wrong.
I see. I thought I knew what the answer to that one was going to be.
You did, huh?
I did.
What did you think it was going to be?
That answer.
Oh, okay.
So, do you have good stories about communication with readers or encountering them, or how have you dealt with readers, or how have readers dealt with you?
When my first romances came out and I would go to writers' conferences, it would always surprise me when somebody would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the writer, you're the author who wrote Keeping Katie," or whatever. And it was like I'm looking behind me, trying to figure out who they're talking to, That can't be me. But now online, I get I don't have any overarching stories, but except for the fact that you do get some really, really great readers communicating with you, sending you email or reviewing your books or talking to you, sending you private notes when they read stuff that, that might be considered, because we talk a lot online and calm you down about things. So I have been very thankful for my readers. They keep me writing.
I remember receiving my first letter from a reader with my very first book, and I got it and I looked at the return address, and it was from Oregon, and I thought, I don't know anybody in Oregon. What is how is this possible? And when I read the note, it gave me chills, because she got from the book what I had hoped people would get from the book. And I often say reading is interactive, that we as authors put material out there, but that's only half of it. The other half is what the reader takes from it. So this was a click. What I put out was what she got from it, and then she wrote to me saying how much she loved it, and I was like, oh my gosh.
It's a wonderful feeling, isn't it?
It was a fabulous feeling. There was also this little tiny piece of me that said, oh my God, strangers are reading my books.
I find that with looking at good reviews too. It just, when somebody loves something that you put so much time in, it's just like, oh my God, they're talking about something that I did. And it's very surprising for all the readers out there. It really is surprising when people like what you did, because you just, we live in our little bubble.
It's a Sally Field moment.
A Sally Field moment.
They like me. They really like me.
Exactly. You're talking about this made me think about a funny story I had about a reader when I was writing romance who, and this really isn't about the books. This is about how she contacted me. She contacted my publisher, who sent me a letter, because they will never give your address out, and put me in contact with this woman who was convinced that I was her husband's sister who had been put up for adoption when I was born.
Oh my gosh.
And I could not convince her that I was not this person. And she kept saying, oh, I know this is really upsetting to find this out, and blah, blah, blah. I'm going, I was number 4 of 6 kids. Believe me. After 3, they would not have adopted a 4th. But it was very interesting.
And it's not like you guys don't look like each other at all.
Oh, yeah.
Some of you, yeah.
But she was convinced because of my last name that I was her brother's long-lost sister. And I kept saying, I wish I could say I was, but I'm not.
There's a book in that, Pat.
Actually, I never thought about that, but you're right. There is a book in that one.
Dibs.
My story. You probably get it done faster than I would.
Of your books that are done so far, as opposed to the ones you're going to write really fast now, Are any of them what you would consider an overlooked gem? Something that even your loyal readers may not have come across?
Well, in the romances, I think, well, it's romantic suspense. Running for Cover always surprises me because it's kind of buried in. I have 2 series of my romances, and it's a theme series. You don't have to read them in order. It's kind of buried like third or fourth in that series, and people don't seem to get to it. And if you like, romantic suspense, that's more romance than suspense, although they are obviously running through the entire book. I think for romance readers, that's the one that I think that gets overlooked a bit. And as far as the suspenses go, I mean, I don't know. I loved Out of Reach, but then I loved the whole Cuba thing and Out of Time. So it's kind of hard to say. But for romances, I would say Running for Cover.
Well, so for somebody who's new to you, hasn't read your books yet, what would be the best book for them to enter, say the romances first and then the thrillers?
If you like, family-oriented romances, then I would say Keeping Katie, because those 3 books are part of a series called A Mother's Heart. They're all about women who are mothers, but in different ways. I mean, not necessarily biological mothers, and they're more about family and the love of family and children, as well as the romantic loves. Keeping Katie is my first book, and I loved it. So I would say if you like family-oriented stories, that you would start with that. Those books are all themed. It doesn't matter which order you read them in. If you like something a little more action, then you start with the Protector series, which are all the heroes in those books are ex-protectors, military or cops or something, and they all have a little bit more of an element. Some of them have more suspense in them than others. So the first one in that series is Loving Lindsay, but it doesn't matter what order you read them in. You can read them all over the place.
How about your thrillers?
The series, Out of Reach seems to be the book that I have got when it was traditionally published originally in hardcover, and I got the best reviews on Out of Reach of any of my books, as far as in Publishers Weekly and everything. Blind Run's kind of my baby, and I do plan to write the sequel to that, but Out of Reach is the book that seems to have the most, seems to be more compelling, I guess, is maybe the right word.
This is another question from a reader. I love this one. If you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Oh my gosh. That would be a really hard decision. It's almost the same thing as asking me who my favorite authors are, which is, since everybody I know is an author, is an unfair question. But, I'm going to cop out and go with one of the big names. Just to meet somebody like J.K. Rowling's. I don't write that kind of book, so maybe that's not a good answer, but,
But, well, why? Why would it?
Because of her incredible skill at detail and putting stories together that are immensely complicated. You can like the books or not, but you can't ignore the skill there. The skill of, and remember, story building is what I love most about writing. And her to be able to put together this really complex world and have it all mesh, I think that is a phenomenal talent. The other author that I adore his skill in storytelling is Stephen King. I don't write that kind of stuff either, so why would I want to work with him? I don't know, just because he has this really great storytelling ability. For people that I write what I write, probably Lisa Gardner. I would love to work with Lisa, because she writes the same type of book that I write, and it would be interesting to work with her.
Okay. Is there anything I'm thinking of? I'm sitting here thinking of authors and working with them and what you'd learn, and I think even like Stephen King, even though you don't write what he writes, I think there could be a great deal that you would learn, that anybody would learn.
He's an incredible storyteller. He really is, and so you would learn that aspect of it from him. And when I say Lisa, I really like her books. That would be more of a collaborative type thing, where I don't know I'm sure she could teach me something, I'm sure, but not like, Stephen King or J.K. Rowling's, that you could actually, I could actually identify what it is they could teach me. Another author that I would really love to work with is Robert McCammon. He is probably one of my all-time favorite authors, and his incredible ability to tell a story, and he doesn't have the complexity as J.K. Rowling. I don't know if anybody does, but he does. He's also a great storyteller and a great writer, and I would think there would just be an incredible amount to learn from him. And he writes all over the place, writes all kinds of stuff.
It's a fun question, isn't it?
Well, it's an interesting thing to think about, because I never even, I have a list of authors I'd like to meet, but would I like to work with them? I mean, in a certain sense, working with somebody like J.K. Rowling could be very intimidating, and even more intimidating than Stephen King. I would be so in awe of her ability that it would be, as I said, intimidating. So I never even thought about actually working with another author.
I think I would tend to take somebody who is dead.
Well, that's an idea.
Just because there's always the possibility you could run across the live person, in real life, but the dead person you can't. So you take the opportunity of the question to go for somebody who is impossible in real life.
But if you're working with them,
how's that for logic?
But if you're working with them, it's okay to run into them, right? Because you're working with them.
So as we're getting closer to the close here, tell us about your most recent release.
The one I'm working on, or the one that just came, the last book in the
most recent release, the one that came out.
Okay, that was Be Out of Time, and that's the second book in the Erin Baker thriller series.
What's the significance of that title?
Because she's on a deadline. She has to. It takes place in Cuba. She gets sent into Cuba to investigate a missing agent or officer. They don't call CIA agents, they're officers, and there is a real short time span. She goes in. She's half Cuban. Book starts in Miami, which I spent most of my life in South Florida, so that fit. And she goes in to investigate, and the way they get her in undercover is that her estranged father runs a medical facility that's something like Doctors Without Borders, but I didn't make up a thing. We didn't use Doctors Without Borders, and that's her way in. But that's not who she goes to investigate. She goes to investigate a missing officer who happens to be a friend. So I have the dynamic there of an estranged father who left her at a very young age, and she has all these this is the emotion thing, all these built-up emotions, and she's very unhappy with the CIA at the moment, but she is only there because of this friend of hers who's missing. So we have the combination of the emotion and the action and this bad stuff. She goes in, they think it's going to be a slam dunk, that she's going to go in and come right out. And of course, that never happens in books, right? It has to get worse and worse and worse. So I really loved writing that book. The whole Cuba thing was fascinating, having spent most of my life in South Florida with the huge Cuban population, and I had to do a ton of research on Cuba. I actually tried to get into Cuba, and at the time I had to submit a application to the State Department, and they turned me down. But so that is...
They're so short-sighted in not thinking that book research is a good reason for any trip.
Yes. I might be able to get in there now, but I couldn't at the time. And I had friends say, "Oh, just fly through fly through Canada or fly through Mexico." And I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, I'm going to do that, and then I'll be the one that make an example of an American in Cuba and get charged." So I didn't do that. But one of the things that I loved about this book, and I won't tell you, but the ending to me leaves Erin, I always like to leave Erin with a little bit more baggage, and she does end up with a lot of baggage in this book, and which is the trigger for the book I'm working on now, the one that's her follow-on.
You have the title for that one yet?
Out of the Woods.
Okay.
Yes, and it started as a short story, and it just kind of, because I was trying to have her reconcile where she was at the end of the book, and it just became much bigger than a short story could handle, and basically she has to come to terms with the kind of person she is, and she is basically a protector. That's what her her whole thing in life has been, she's a protector and a warrior, and she's been fighting that forever. And in this book, she has to come to terms with what she is and what she is meant, why she is here. Does that sound a little too philosophical for you?
No, no. Pat, where can readers find out more about when Out of the Woods is coming out and about your other books?
Well, they can go to my website, which is patricialewin.com, and Lewin's Lewin. I have excerpts out there. I have a brief blog, and I will post about Out of the Woods as I get a little further along, where I can actually give you a time that's a little bit closer than early next year.
And how about the romance books?
That's at patriciakeelyn.com, and you spell Keelyn Keelyn. It's much more active than my Lewin website, and I can't even tell you why that is, but that there's always something going on there. I have blogs and giveaways and things like that. At this point, I don't have any crossover between the two, and this is actually going to be a question for your readers, is that I find that there are a lot of romance readers read everything. There's a lot of crossover. That my romance readers will go read my suspense books. I don't find that there's crossover the other way around. And so I've been considering putting both websites under an umbrella site with links to both websites so that you can cross over. And I'm not sure whether that's a good idea or not, so I'd love to hear what readers think about that. An umbrella site that would either be my, I don't know, just something where you go to one place and then you can go to either my suspense books or my romance books. So I'd love to hear what readers think about that.
Okay. And we will also have those URLs and others in the show notes for folks to find Patricia's books. Now we come to what I call the epilogue, rapid fire, either or questions.
Okay.
No warning. So, well, I'll give you a warm up one. Appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
Day or night?
Day.
Toenail polish or bear?
Toenail polish. You said bear, and I'm thinking bears, and I'm going, what does one thing have to do with the other?
Oh, you're thinking EAR instead of
Yes,
ARE?
exactly. Polish, definitely polish.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Dog or cat?
Cat.
Yeah, knew we wouldn't agree on that one.
Yeah.
Which is eerier to you, an owl hooting or coyotes howling?
Coyotes.
Sailboat or motorboat?
Sailboat.
Save the best for last or grab the best first?
Save the best for last.
Paint or wallpaper?
Paint.
Mountains or beach?
Oh, this is a really hard one because I can never make up my mind. I used to play this with my daughter, and I love both the mountains and the beach, so I would have to have a mountainous beach. I really don't know the answer to that one because I love them both.
Cake or ice cream?
Ice cream.
Yoga or walk?
Walk.
Garden or house decorating?
Do I have to do either? Probably house decorating of the two would be the least of the two evils.
I was guessing that one. Leggings or sweats?
Sweats.
Cowboy boots or hiking boots?
Hiking boots.
Oh, I thought that might be another.
I don't, to be honest, I don't like boots, period, of any kind. And cowboy boots, hiking boots have a function. Cowboy boots don't seem to have one. Well, I guess
Yes,
if you're a cowboy, they are. If you're a cowboy, they are, but yeah.
Okay, well, it's been lots of fun to have one of my long time, we won't say oldest, we'll say one of my longtime writing buddies here. And hope that the listeners will come back for another session of Authors Love Readers, and hope you have a great week of reading.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.